What do you learn about human nature by looking at the history of slavery in America?
Oh my.
So, what does that tell you about people?
Well, I think of two things right off the top of my head. One is about the capacity of people for looking the other way in the face of unethical and morally profoundly problematic practice. So, I mean, slavery was controversial. It was controversial going all the way back to the founding of the United States of America. The country was founded on a compromise where half of the country thought that slavery was abhorrent and would not have had it countenanced in the Constitution. The other half of the country were steeped in the dependence on the labor of these African captives and their descendants. The economy depended upon it. They owned them as property. That was their wealth. Their wealth was invested to some degree in the value of these human beings. And in order for the United States to come together as a confederation of the several colonies, there had to be a compromise made, and it was made, where slavery was allowed to persist. And the people who were against it or who thought it morally problematic were able to countenance the practice in the southern states where slavery flourished. And that went on for 75 years after the founding of the country until the crisis of the late 1850s that led to the Civil War and ultimately to the emancipation. So one thing I think about human nature from the fact of slavery is that the ability of people to live with terrible, morally questionable practices and have that as a part of their institutions. It took a movement, a massive movement of abolitionists struggling against slavery for the better part of a century before that practice could be eradicated. But the other thing about human nature that I see is the ability of people to sustain their humanity under the most awful, oppressive conditions. The enslaved persons, the slaves, and their children, I mean, they were chattel. They were bought and sold like horses or cattle. And yet they were not, their humanity was not destroyed by that. And they were able to sustain their dignity to some degree in such a manner that once emancipation finally did arrive, the freedmen and women, the persons who had been enslaved and who were set free, were able to, over the following decades, build a foundation for the development of African Americans within the context of American society that eventually culminated in the civil rights movement of the middle of the 20th century and has led us into the present day. So, uh, you know, human nature can countenance awful evil, but human nature can also survive in the face of terrible evil. That's what I take from slavery.
That survival, that flame can burn even when the world around it tries to put it out. There's still a little flame of human consciousness, of spirit, of culture, of whatever the hell that is that makes humans flourish and makes humans beautiful. That lives on, no
That's
matter
very well
what.
said. Yeah, I think you put it very well. There's got to be some poetic way of expressing that. That
Leave it to the poets.
yeah.
What about the people that look the other way? How many people do you think, just regular people, knew that this is wrong? Or do people through generations convince themselves, most people, most regular people, convince themselves that there's nothing wrong?
Uh, yeah.
I ask this question because I wonder what we're looking the other way on today also. because I mean, you have to kind of, you have to ask yourself these difficult questions of assuming we're the same people we were
Yeah.
back then we can be flawed in that same kind of way. We can look the other way just as others have in history.
Yeah, and you spoke of the European context and of the Nazis, and certainly a lot of people had to be looking the other way when the massive crimes that were committed by that regime were being undertaken. I mean, railroad cars full of human beings being taken off to be slaughtered or to be worked to death, and labor camps or to be gassed, etc. A lot of people had to know about what was going on and look the other way, or enthusiastically supported the persecution of the Jews and the Gypsies and so on. And I don't know, I wasn't around in 1840. My sense of the matter is that, like many practices that are unjust, most people thought that's just the way it is. I mean, that's the world that they inherited. They were not moralists. They were not revolutionaries. They just wanted to go along. Some people might have been troubled by it, but thought there's nothing that can be done. Some people might have thought, well, they're these Black Africans. They're not really like us, and they are lucky to be here. If they were in Africa, they'd be worse off still. Some people might have thought that. Some people might have been disturbed, but not been able to see what it is that they could do about it. They might have thought, "Oh, this is disgusting. This is not something I would want to have anything to do with." But not knowing whether there's any practical way of opposing it. That's why you need a movement. You need for the people who are troubled by the practice to know that there are others like themselves equally troubled, and as they gather together collectively they can exert their influence. I mean, debates about the wrongness of slavery, as I say, go all the way back to the founding of the country. There were abolitionists, and there were people who opposed the compromise that led to the framing documents and institutions that created the United States of America. Opposed the countenancing of slavery in that situation. But it took a while before that could come to a head and produce the crisis, which ultimately led to the eradication of slavery. I would note that slavery is not unique to the United States. It's not unique to the Western Hemisphere. That enslavement of people, the trafficking in human chattel, is something that one sees on a global basis. One sees it going all the way back to antiquity. So we might ask, how is it that people finally came to turn their backs and eradicate the practice? That might be the thing worth really trying to understand, because the practice itself is, there's a wonderful book by the sociologist Orlando Patterson called Slavery and Social Death that was published in 1982, which is a comprehensive history and social analysis of the institution of slavery over 2,500 years, going back to the classical Greek and Roman civilizations, finding slavery in Africa amongst Africans, finding slavery in the Middle East, finding slavery in the Far East, finding slavery in South Asia, the enslavement of people, the practice of taking someone as a captive in war, and then instead of killing them, which you could do, making them into your property, was very, very widespread in human culture. So, I mean, I like to make this point sometimes when people are talking about how wrong slavery was, and I agree without any question that the practice was profoundly morally problematic. But I like to make the point that given how wrong it was, think about how uh, impressive was the accomplishment of the eradication of slavery. That was something. I mean, there were 600,000 dead in the war between the states, 1861 to 1865, in a country of 30 million people. That's a lot of dead people uh, who gave their lives not to eradicate slavery. In every instance, probably most of them were just fighting for, they enlisted or were conscripted into the forces, and they fought and they died. But the net effect of their having fought and died was to push along a process that led to the eradication of slavery. That's an amazing achievement. The slaves themselves were largely uneducated and backward in their. Of course, what else could they have been? They were kept in captivity. They were prevented from developing their human potential, and yet after the end of slavery, that population, that 4 million plus African descended people, uh, became the foundation for what a century later leads to Martin Luther King standing in the Washington Mall and giving that great speech. And now here we are 150 years down the road, and Barack Obama is president of the United States. Now, he did not descend from slaves. I think we must not lose track of that. But he identified as an African American and was a part of the population that consisted largely of people who descended from slaves. And we African Americans are, for all practical purposes, fully equal citizens of this great republic. That has happened within a century and a half. And I don't know that you can find any parallel to that kind of transformation in the status of people from human chattel to full citizens of the republic. Anywhere in human history, it's certainly worth celebrating the achievement of the eradication of slavery, I would say.
And it probably started with a few people that inside their mind dared to rebel. It's interesting to think about how it all started. How, in the state of injustice, the revolution percolates, like where it starts. You said people that see something is wrong find each other. It's you know, it's in the ideas of charismatic individuals that not only know that something is wrong, but are able to tell others about it and be convincing, and then together gather and rise up. It's interesting to make this kind of incredible progress from slavery to where we are today, to live out the ideal of this all men are created equal. Um,
Yeah,
the power of individual, because I don't know what you think about it, but I tend to think that a few small individuals probably originated this. Like it's the power of the individual, because sometimes we think there's injustice in the world. What can I possibly do? But I tend to think one person can be the seed of starting to fix the injustice.
sure. One person here, one person there. Yeah. One thinks, of course, of Frederick Douglass, the massively significant figure who was born in slavery, who stole his freedom, and because he was property, and he decided he was not going to be property anymore, and he took it unto himself to emancipate himself personally, and who became an educated, powerfully articulate, massively influential person in the United States and in England, going around presenting himself as an embodiment of human dignity and um, uh, uh, the commitment to ideals of equality. And I mean, he's just one person, but there were others